You judged me by my house, my car, my skin, but you didn't see the truth standing right in front of you.
The early morning sun washed over a quiet suburban neighborhood, the kind where lawns were trimmed to perfection and driveways gleamed with polished SUVs. On the surface, it looked like the picture of peace and prosperity. But that illusion shattered the moment a white pickup truck rolled slowly down the street. Pulling up in front of a modest two-story home, out stepped two men in cheap navy jackets with the word security ironed on the back. Their clipboards were oversized, their sunglasses too dark, and their voices carried an arrogance that instantly put neighbors on edge. They weren't real police officers, yet they strutted with the confidence of authority. Inside that house lived Darius Coleman, a man the neighborhood homeowners association often whispered about. He didn't fit in, at least not in their eyes. While everyone else boasted about their golf memberships and boat trips, Darius lived simply, quietly. His car wasn't flashy, his clothes weren't designer, and that was enough for some to label him suspicious. As the two men marched up his driveway, Darius opened the door, calm and composed. He stood tall, broad-shouldered, his presence commanding yet humble. His warm brown skin glistened in the morning light, and his sharp eyes scanned the scene with quiet calculation. "Sir," one of the fake officers barked, "we've had multiple complaints about you violating community rules. Step outside, we're here to detain you." The audacity hung in the air. The neighbors peeked through blinds, some smirking, others confused. A black man being treated like a criminal in his own home wasn't new to them. It was a scene they had grown disturbingly comfortable with. But here's what no one knew. Darius Coleman wasn't just any man. Behind his calm demeanor was a history so shocking, so untouchable, that if revealed, it would silence every whisper and every smirk in this neighborhood. Darius didn't raise his voice. He didn't argue. He simply looked at the two men, his silence both unnerving and powerful. The men mistook it for fear. What a mistake that would turn out to be. You see, life has a way of disguising greatness in plain sight. Sometimes the person judged the harshest is the very one carrying the heaviest crown. And sometimes those who appear weakest are holding back a storm of strength that could change everything. This story isn't just about fake cops, arrogance, or prejudice. It's about what happens when truth explodes in the face of lies. It's about dignity, justice, and a reminder that appearances deceive far more than they reveal. And in just a few moments, this quiet street was going to witness something unforgettable. But before we dive deeper into Darius's story, I want you to pause for a moment. Ask yourself, how often do we judge people based on what they look like, where they live, or what car they drive? How often do we mistake humility for weakness? If you believe stories like this need to be heard, stories that challenge stereotypes and reveal the power of hidden strength, then make sure to subscribe to this channel. Turn on notifications so you don't miss the next chapter, because what you're about to discover will stay with you long after this video ends. Now let's return to that driveway, where two men in fake uniforms were about to make the biggest mistake of their lives. The taller of the two men adjusted his sunglasses and sneered as if he had already won some imaginary battle. His name was Richard Hale, the self-proclaimed enforcer of the Neighborhood Homeowners Association. He wasn't officially elected to anything. He had simply taken it upon himself to protect the community, and by protect, what he really meant was harass anyone who didn't fit his picture-perfect standards. Richard had always been that kind of man, the type who mistook authority for superiority. With thinning blonde hair slicked back and a smirk that never seemed to leave his face, he thrived on intimidation. Beside him was his loyal sidekick, Connor Briggs, a man with more brawn than brains, who mimicked Richard's arrogance but lacked his sharp tongue. The two of them strutted around the neighborhood in their cheap jackets, convincing themselves they were lawmen on patrol. To Richard, Darius Coleman was a problem. He didn't throw block parties, didn't gossip on the cul-de-sac, didn't join their golf outings. He kept to himself, and that was enough to provoke Richard's suspicion. In his narrow world, silence equaled guilt, and dignity equaled defiance. "Look at him," Richard whispered to Connor as Darius stood calmly at the door. "Always acting like he's better than us. Can't even cut his lawn the way we asked. He thinks the rules don't apply to him," Connor chuckled, crossing his arms. "Let's scare him a little. Show him he can't just ignore the HOA." Richard's smirk deepened. "Exactly. Nobody's untouchable." The irony of those words would soon come crashing down on him. For now, though, Richard played his part to perfection, the villain who enjoyed his imagined power. He puffed out his chest, raised his voice, and pointed at Darius like a judge passing sentence. "Mr. Coleman," he declared, "you've been warned multiple times about community violations. You refuse to comply. This is your final chance to cooperate. Step outside, or we'll escalate this matter further." The neighbors, who had been watching from their windows, began to gather in small clusters on the sidewalks. Richard loved an audience. It fueled him, fed his ego, made him feel like a hero in some grand story only he believed in. What made Richard truly dangerous wasn't just his arrogance, it was his ability to manipulate perception. To the uninformed eye, he appeared confident, authoritative, and justified. And that's exactly how he liked it. Darius, however, didn't flinch. He remained in the doorway, his face unreadable, his silence sharper than any insult. This infuriated Richard. How dare this man not tremble at his words? How dare he not submit to his fake authority? "You think you're special, don't you?" Richard snapped, stepping closer. "You think you don't have to answer to anyone? Well, let me tell you something. Around here, we decide who belongs and who doesn't. And trust me, you don't." Those words cut through the air like poison. It wasn't just about HOA rules. It was about exclusion, control, and prejudice, wrapped in the disguise of community order. The neighbors shifted uncomfortably. Some knew Richard was overstepping, but few dared to challenge him. After all, bullies thrive in silence, and Richard had mastered the art of silencing others. But what Richard failed to realize was this. In his quest to prove dominance, he was walking directly into the trap of his own arrogance. Because the man he was trying to humiliate wasn't just another quiet neighbor. He was someone whose very identity could shatter Richard's entire illusion of power, and the clock was ticking toward that revelation. Darius stood in the doorway, his posture calm but unshakable. To the untrained eye, it looked like he was simply being passive, maybe even intimidated. But those who knew how to read people, really read them, would have noticed something different. His shoulders weren't slouched. His gaze didn't waver. His breathing was measured, steady, almost deliberate. Richard Hale couldn't see it, but Darius wasn't resisting out of fear. He was calculating. Behind that calm exterior was a life story few could imagine. Darius Coleman was born in Atlanta, raised by a single mother who worked double shifts as a nurse to keep food on the table. Their small apartment barely fit 2 beds and a kitchen table, but it was filled with love and lessons that would shape him forever. Darius, his mother would say, "The world won't always treat you fairly, but you can't let it take your dignity. Stand tall even when they try to make you small." Those words became the backbone of his character. At school he was quiet but observant. While other kids played loud and reckless, Darius sat back and studied people, the way they moved, the words they chose, the expressions they wore when they thought no one was watching. His teachers noticed his sharp memory, his ability to connect dots others missed, but childhood wasn't easy. He was often underestimated, overlooked, sometimes mocked. The boy who wore hand-me-downs and carried lunch in a paper bag was an easy target. Still, he never lashed out. Instead, he learned to use people's underestimation as his shield. When he grew older, Darius found refuge in structure. He joined the military, where his discipline and calm under pressure set him apart. In training exercises, while others panicked under simulated chaos, Darius kept his cool. His instructors often remarked, "Coleman doesn't break, not even under fire." He carried those lessons into every chapter of his life. But to the neighbors who only saw the surface, he was just a quiet man in an ordinary house. They didn't see the years of endurance, the sharpened instincts, the hidden authority. Back in the present, Richard mistook Darius's silence for weakness. But Connor, the sidekick, tilted his head and frowned. Something about the way Darius stood there unnerved him. "Rich," Connor muttered under his breath. "You sure about this?" "He doesn't look scared," Richard scoffed. "He's bluffing. Guys like him always fold." But Connor wasn't convinced. For just a moment, his eyes met Darius's, and he felt a strange chill, like standing in front of a storm cloud you can't yet see, but know is coming. Meanwhile, Darius thought back to something his commanding officer once told him during his military years. True strength isn't about showing off. It's about waiting until the exact moment when silence becomes power. That lesson echoed now as he stood in his doorway. He didn't need to shout. He didn't need to prove anything yet. His stillness was his message. The neighborhood, however, had no clue who they were watching. Some whispered, "Why doesn't he just do what they say?" Others shrugged, assuming Darius had no choice. But one woman on the corner, Mrs. Ramirez, clutched her coffee cup tighter. She had lived long enough to recognize when someone wasn't being cowed, but was instead holding something back. She whispered to her husband, "That man isn't afraid. He's waiting." If only the others had noticed too. Richard, feeding off the crowd, puffed his chest and said loudly, "You people see this? This is what happens when someone thinks the rules don't matter. We can't let people like him bring down the neighborhood." The words rang out with venom disguised as leadership. And yet, in contrast, Darius's silence spoke louder than Richard's entire performance. Inside his mind, Darius was already weighing the situation. Not just the men in front of him, but the bystanders, the timing, the possible outcomes. He didn't want a scene, but he also knew there might come a moment when the truth could no longer stay hidden, and that moment was approaching fast. Because the thing about suppressed strength is that it can only stay hidden for so long. Eventually, it reveals itself. Sometimes in a whisper, sometimes in a storm, and Darius Coleman's storm was closer than anyone could imagine. The tension on that quiet suburban street was reaching a breaking point. Richard Hale, reveling in his self-appointed authority, stood tall in front of Darius's doorway. Connor Briggs loomed beside him, less confident now but unwilling to show doubt. The neighbors had gathered in clusters, whispering and speculating, some recording the scene on their phones. Richard raised his voice again, his tone sharp with arrogance. "Step outside, Coleman. You're not above the rules. You don't get special treatment just because you think you're smarter than the rest of us." The words were intended to humiliate, but instead they bounced harmlessly off Darius's composure. Finally, after a long silence, Darius spoke. His voice was deep, steady, and commanding. "You've made a mistake." The crowd hushed. The words weren't shouted, but they carried a weight that made people stop whispering and lean in. Richard smirked, though his confidence wavered just a little. "A mistake? No, Coleman. The only mistake here is you thinking you can ignore us. You don't belong in this neighborhood if you can't follow the rules." Darius stepped forward, slowly, deliberately, until he was standing at the edge of the doorway. His eyes locked onto Richard's, unflinching. "You shouldn't pretend to be something you're not," he said. The statement hit harder than expected. Richard blinked, unsettled by the calmness in Darius's gaze. Connor shifted uncomfortably, tugging at his jacket sleeve. "What's that supposed to mean?" Richard demanded, trying to reclaim control. But before Darius could respond, Richard made his next move. He waved his hand dramatically and barked, "Connor, restrain him. He's refusing to cooperate." Gasps erupted from the crowd. Connor hesitated. He had no legal authority, no badge, not even real training. Yet under Richard's glare, he felt cornered. He stepped forward toward Darius. But that was the moment the performance began. Darius didn't flinch, didn't move until Connor was just within reach. And then, with astonishing speed, Darius sidestepped and gently but firmly redirected Connor's arm away from him. It wasn't aggressive. It wasn't violent. It was precise, like water flowing around a rock, smooth and effortless. Connor stumbled, nearly falling onto the grass, stunned. He looked back at Darius with wide eyes, as if he had just been disarmed by a magician. What was that? Someone whispered from the crowd. Richard's face reddened. "Don't just stand there. Grab him!" Connor tried again, this time lunging with more force. But once again Darius moved with calculated grace. A simple shift of weight, a pivot of his foot, and Connor found himself twisted around, his own momentum betraying him. He landed awkwardly on one knee, breathing hard, sweat forming on his forehead. The neighbors murmured in astonishment. This wasn't random luck. Darius's movements had the clarity of training, years of it. Richard's smirk vanished. He barked, "Stop playing games. You think a couple of tricks make you impressive? You're nothing but a coward hiding behind silence." But Darius didn't respond to Richard. Instead, he addressed the crowd for the first time, his voice even and strong. "Look carefully. Who here really has authority, and who's just pretending?" The words hit like a lightning bolt. People exchanged glances, some lowering their phones, others frowning at Richard and Connor. Connor backed away, clearly shaken. He muttered, "Rich, I don't think we should—" "Quiet." Richard snapped, his pride on the line. He stepped forward himself now, puffing out his chest. "You think you can embarrass me in front of everyone?" "You're nothing, Coleman, nothing!" The intensity in Richard's voice was sharp, but the cracks in his armor were showing. For the first time, the neighbors weren't fully buying into his act. Darius, however, remained calm. He looked at Richard, his tone colder now. "Do you know what the problem with pretending to be powerful is, Richard? Eventually, you meet someone who doesn't have to pretend." The silence that followed was electric. Richard scoffed, trying to laugh it off, but his voice betrayed a tremor. "You think you're tough? You think you can scare me with parlor tricks?" Darius didn't reply. Instead, he stepped out fully onto the driveway. His posture shifted slightly, shoulders squared, stance firm. It was subtle, but those with an eye for discipline recognized it instantly. One of the neighbors whispered, "That's military." "The way he's standing, it's military." The murmur rippled through the crowd. Suddenly, the balance of perception was shifting. Richard saw it too, and his desperation grew. He shouted, "Enough of this! Leave this neighborhood, Coleman. We don't want your kind here." The words stung, dripping with the ugliness of exclusion. But instead of rising to anger, Darius allowed the silence to stretch. His gaze unshaken, then with precise clarity, he spoke, "You don't know who you're talking to." The line cut through the air like steel. The neighbors fell silent again. Even Connor froze, his doubt now obvious. Richard tried to cover his unease with more bluster, but the cracks in his confidence were wide now. His audience wasn't as eager to cheer him on. His control was slipping, and Darius hadn't even revealed his hand yet. What the crowd had just witnessed wasn't aggression. It wasn't violence. It was mastery, control, the kind of power that doesn't need shouting or threats to be undeniable. And this was only the beginning, because what no one knew, not Richard, not Connor, not even the watchful neighbors, was that Darius Coleman's true identity was far beyond what anyone on this street could imagine. And when that truth came to light, everything would change. The crowd was buzzing now, murmurs echoing across the cul-de-sac. Phones were lifted higher, lenses capturing every movement. What started as Richard Hale's stage was now slipping away from him, tilting toward the calm figure standing tall in the driveway. Richard, face flushed with rage, refused to accept it. He stepped closer, pointing his finger directly into Darius's chest. "You think you're clever, Coleman? You think this little show makes you somebody? You're nothing. Just another wannabe tough guy who thinks rules don't apply to him." Darius glanced down at the pointed finger, then back up at Richard's eyes. His voice remained calm, but there was a weight in it that silenced even the whispers around them. "I don't think you understand the situation you've put yourself in." Richard laughed mockingly, though it sounded forced. "And what situation is that? What are you going to do, call the cops?" "Oh wait, you're probably afraid of them too." That was it. That was the line that shifted everything, because without breaking eye contact, Darius reached into his pocket, not with speed, not with aggression, but with deliberate precision. The neighbors held their breath. Richard stiffened, unsure of what was happening. And then, in one smooth motion, Darius pulled out a leather wallet. He flipped it open, and the unmistakable golden badge of the Federal Bureau of Investigation glinted in the sunlight. Gasps erupted. A child whispered, "He's FBI." Someone else muttered, "Oh my God." Richard's smirk collapsed into stunned silence. His finger, still hovering near Darius's chest, trembled as he slowly pulled it back. Darius's voice cut through the chaos, steady and cold. "You've been harassing a federal agent. Do you have any idea how serious that is?" The cul-de-sac erupted with whispers, shockwaves rippling through the crowd. Connor Briggs staggered backward, nearly tripping over the curb. His mouth hung open like he'd seen a ghost. Richard stammered, That's fake. It's got to be fake." "You're bluffing." Darius turned his gaze toward him, eyes sharp as steel. "Would you like me to call the local precinct right now and let them verify it? Or maybe I should ask you to explain why you were impersonating law enforcement in front of half your neighbors." The phones recording from every angle suddenly became Richard's nightmare. His mouth opened, but no words came out. Darius stepped closer, his presence overwhelming, though his tone never rose. "You've been acting like you're untouchable. But let me make something clear. In this country, impersonating an officer is a federal crime. And intimidation, harassment, that's only the beginning." The neighbors, once passive onlookers, now leaned in with a mix of awe and justice-fueled excitement. The balance of power had completely flipped. Richard's arrogance melted away. His hands twitched nervously, his voice cracking. We were just trying to enforce the rules. That's all. We didn't mean enforce the rules." Darius repeated, his tone sharp but controlled. "You don't get to make up rules. You don't get to decide who belongs and who doesn't. That's not leadership. That's abuse." Connor, pale and sweating, raised his hand slightly. "We didn't know, man. We didn't know you were—" Darius cut him off. "That's exactly the point. You never know who someone really is. And yet you judged me. You tried to shame me. You pretended to have power you never earned. The silence that followed was deafening. Richard's face had drained of color, his bravado shattered beyond repair. He was no longer the enforcer of the block. He was the fool, exposed under the very spotlight he had craved. And then, with one final line, Darius sealed the revelation. "You thought I was invisible. But the truth is, I'm the man people like you hope they never meet." The neighbors gasped again, a mix of shock and admiration. The entire street understood now. Darius Coleman wasn't just a quiet neighbor. He wasn't just disciplined or mysterious. He was the most feared FBI agent in the state, living in plain sight, a storm disguised as calm. Richard Hale had tried to stage a performance of power, but Darius's truth was the real show, and it had left the entire neighborhood stunned, humbled, and forever changed. The driveway, once Richard Hale's stage, had become his undoing. The same neighbors who used to nod politely at his orders now stared at him with narrowed eyes and raised phones, their recordings capturing every second of his collapse. Richard's hands shook as he tried to speak. I didn't know. I swear we didn't mean any harm." But his words sounded hollow, pathetic. The man who once barked orders with arrogance now struggled to string together a defense. Darius didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His authority was absolute, undeniable. "You pretended to be law enforcement," he said evenly. "You targeted me without cause. You tried to humiliate me in front of my own neighbors. And you thought there would be no consequences." Richard swallowed hard, sweat forming on his brow. Connor stood behind him, silent and pale, as if hoping invisibility might save him from guilt. The crowd's whispers grew louder. Mrs. Ramirez shook her head and said aloud, "All this time we thought you were protecting us, but you were just bullying people." Others chimed in, their voices echoing Richard's downfall. "He lied to all of us. Making fake arrests, that's illegal. I can't believe we let him push people around." For the first time, Richard felt the sting of public rejection. His carefully constructed facade of control crumbled, brick by brick, under the weight of truth. Darius took a step closer, his voice sharp but calm. Here's what happens now. You're going to stop harassing this neighborhood. You're going to stop pretending to be something you're not. And if I hear one more complaint, Richard, just one, you won't be dealing with a homeowners meeting. You'll be dealing with federal charges." Richard's lips parted, but no words came. His pride was shattered, his reputation in ruins. For years he had thrived on intimidation, but in a single morning his empire of arrogance had collapsed. Connor tugged at Richard's sleeve, whispering frantically, "Let's go, man. Just let's go." Reluctantly, Richard turned. His steps were heavy, his shoulders slumped, every ounce of swagger drained from him. The crowd parted, not out of respect, but out of disgust. His walk of shame was filmed from every angle, destined to live forever in neighborhood group chats and social media threads. By the time he reached his pickup truck, Richard Hale was no longer the feared enforcer of the HOA. He was nothing more than a humiliated pretender, exposed and powerless, and Darius Coleman. He hadn't even broken a sweat. As Richard's pickup sputtered down the street, the air in the neighborhood shifted. For the first time in years, people weren't whispering out of fear of Richard Hale. They were whispering in awe of the quiet man they had underestimated for so long. Darius didn't gloat. He didn't smirk or throw insults. Instead, he simply tucked his badge back into his pocket and turned to face the cluster of neighbors still lingering on the sidewalks. His expression was calm, but his presence filled the space like a beacon. "I want you all to remember something," he said, his voice firm but not harsh. "Strength isn't about loud voices or fake authority. It's about integrity, about protecting, not controlling." The neighbors listened closely, many of them lowering their phones now, realizing the moment was no longer about spectacle, but about truth. Mrs. Ramirez, her hands trembling slightly, stepped forward. "Mr. Coleman," she said softly, "we had no idea. We judged you wrong, and I think we all owe you an apology." Darius nodded respectfully. "You don't owe me anything. What matters is that we learn from this. Don't let arrogance masquerade as leadership. Don't let silence give power to bullies. And most importantly, never assume you know someone's worth just by looking at them." His words carried weight, resonating deeply with everyone present. Even the children, usually restless during adult conversations, stood quietly, absorbing every syllable. One neighbor raised a tentative voice. "So, all this time you were one of the people protecting us?" "For real." Darius gave a small smile. "My work has always been about protecting this country, this community, even if you didn't know it. I didn't move here for recognition. I moved here because I wanted a normal life, some peace. But peace doesn't mean allowing injustice to thrive." The impact of his message was immediate. The same people who had once allowed Richard to speak over them were now nodding, inspired. The illusion of Richard's control had been shattered, replaced by a new understanding. True authority came from service, not dominance. In the days that followed, change swept through the neighborhood. The HOA, once run on fear and intimidation, was reorganized. New leadership emerged. This time, people who genuinely cared about community rather than control. Richard Hale disappeared from meetings altogether, his reputation ruined. Connor Briggs quietly moved away, unable to bear the shame. But the bigger change wasn't structural, it was cultural. Neighbors began talking to one another more, looking out for each other in ways they hadn't before. The silent nods became conversations. The distrust between families dissolved into cooperation. Where there had once been division, there was now unity. And at the center of it all stood Darius Coleman. Not as a celebrity, not as a hero demanding recognition, but as a quiet reminder of resilience. He never boasted about being FBI again. In fact, he went back to his normal routines, morning jogs, quiet evenings on the porch, and simple greetings to those passing by. But now those greetings were returned with genuine respect. Children who had once been told to stay away from that house now waved eagerly when they saw him. Parents, humbled by their misjudgment, encouraged kindness instead of suspicion. The neighborhood, once fractured by arrogance, had been healed by truth, and though Darius never sought credit, his triumph had sparked something far greater than personal victory. It had planted a seed of social change, proof that when justice stands tall, even quietly, it has the power to transform entire communities. In the end, this story wasn't just about a fake arrest or a neighborhood feud. It was about the danger of judging people by appearances and the cost of letting arrogance run unchecked. Richard Hale believed power came from intimidation and loud voices. But Darius Coleman showed that true power comes from discipline, integrity, and the courage to stand tall even when underestimated. How often in life do we make the same mistake as Richard, assuming we know someone's worth because of how they look, where they live, or how quiet they seem? Too often we forget that greatness doesn't need to announce itself. It lives in the calm, in the silence, in the people who walk humbly while carrying unimaginable strength. Darius didn't just defend himself, he inspired change. He proved that one person's dignity can dismantle another's arrogance. And he reminded us that every community, every society becomes stronger when we replace judgment with respect and fear with fairness. So let this story be more than entertainment. Let it be a lesson. Don't underestimate people. Don't be quick to assume. And never allow arrogance to masquerade as leadership. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to this channel for more inspiring stories. Share this video with someone who needs the reminder that true strength doesn't shout, it speaks through action. Because sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one holding the loudest truth.